Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's event entitled Jumpstart Your 2015 Cloud ROI with the new Microsoft Enterprise Mobility Suite. To learn more about the ways that you can participate in today's event, please click on the Q&A button in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. If you're having any difficulties with viewing the stream, please refresh your screen by pressing Control F5 on your keyboard. I would like to turn today's event over to your presenter, Colm Whelan. Colm, you now have the floor.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks so much, Nicole, for your warm introduction. Today we'll be continuing our webinar series on the Microsoft stack, specifically Microsoft's new Enterprise Mobility Suite. This webinar will probably take approximately an hour. There is the facility to ask questions that will be logged in the system throughout the presentation, so please do feel free to do that. And my colleague Vinny Alwani and I will take the questions at the end of the session. So just briefly about me, I'm Vice President of Cloud Solutions at Lighthouse Computer Services, the organization hosting the event today. I've been working in the Microsoft Cloud space since 2009. Specifically beginning with BPOS, which was Microsoft's first venture into the exchange, collaboration, and unified communication space in the cloud, which is now called Office 365, which a lot of our customers will be familiar with. I've also been working on Microsoft Azure since its inception also. So specifically leveraging the Microsoft Cloud for infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, storage, and today Enterprise Mobility Suite, which I think is a great next step for Microsoft, and hopefully will give you a great high-level overview of the offering. We will be having continuing sessions throughout the spring in more deep dives on each of the specific topics that we'll cover today, but today should give you a great understanding as to what the offering encompasses and how it can help current cloud customers or on-premises customers to leverage these platforms as we move forward. So I am from Ireland, which you may be able to tell by my accent, where I did work for Microsoft, but I've been living in the greater Boston area more than 13 years now, working with some of the top Microsoft partners in the region, and more recently for the last 9 months with Lighthouse. So just a brief overview of Lighthouse and who we are. So we are a Microsoft Gold partner. We've been in business approximately 20 years. We are a high-end strategy consulting organization with approximately a workforce of 70 people, and I would think we have approximately 50 high-end consultants. We cover pretty much the entire Microsoft stack, except for a few key areas that we hand off to some of our partners, and that will be specifically around Dynamics, Microsoft's CRM solution, and our ERP solution. So pretty much everything else, whether it's on-premises or in the Microsoft Cloud, which is Microsoft's big direction, of course, these days, we can support. At any one time, we would be doing multiple engagements with customers across the New England region. Some of those customers will be less than 50 people in size, and some of them would be tens of thousands of users. They will be leveraging all different facets of the Microsoft Cloud, of course, whether it's messaging, unified communications, or collaboration. So we typically have most of our people billable. We don't hire people out of college, as we like to bring as much value from a strategy point of view that we can to our customers. So let's talk about mobility and the fact that it is the new normal. So there are a couple of mega trends that have been changing the world of work as many of us know it today, and most of us on the call will be familiar with this. You know, the place where people work is no longer exclusively the workplace. People work from home, which I am right now, you know, on this presentation today. People work from cafes. You know, we see people in Starbucks all the time. For a consulting company like us, we have people at different sites. They're on the road, they're in the air, but they always need to be connected. So in fact, most people can and do work just about from anywhere. Even when we're in the office, people don't expect to be sitting at their desk for most of the day. You know, most of us are going to different meetings, we're in the hallway, but we definitely like to be connected all the time to our multiple different devices. And typically these are devices, you know, that we bring ourselves to the organization, which is quite common. And that's one of the main purposes of this discussion today. And so just look at some of the statistics. You know, 66% of employees use personal devices, often referred to as bring your own device, BYOD, for work purposes. I myself would have actually multiple devices. I have a Windows phone, I have a Droid, I have an iPad, and I have a Surface, you know, so I'm probably pretty classic example of people that we meet all the time today with multiple devices. And of course, then I have a laptop, you know, when I'm sitting at my desk at home. 18% of all software spending by 2017 will be a software as a service type delivery. So typically, you know, Office 365, Salesforce, platforms of that nature. And 33% of employees that work on employee premises, you know, frequently work away from their desks. So, you know, that's pretty typical for all of us on the call as well today. So what's driving this change? So the user, you know, and devices. Okay, so what's the big shift in work practices? So as I mentioned before, there are a couple of mega trends that have taken hold. Firstly, there's that proliferation of consumer devices, also often referred to, the cool term we hear today as well is, you know, consumerization of IT. Users, of course, have a lot more devices to choose from, new form factors, whether they're tablets, smartphones, etc., different platforms, different OSs, different shapes, sizes, and of course the net result is that these devices become an object of personal choice for these users, and those users actually feel a strong affinity with the devices they use. And if we try to force a user to settle for a device that they don't love or stop them using a device that they're already familiar with, if we're working in the IT world, you know, we're definitely asking for trouble. So as it stands, as I said before, over 60% of devices in the workplace are actually personally owned. And when it comes to apps and data, then there's the cloud, okay? So people are always connected. And, you know, there's pretty much an app for just about everything that we need to leverage today. And this explosion of low-cost SaaS apps means that if a user can't find a way to do what they want with the tools IT give them, it's very easy and cheap to find their own solutions. And so what is referred to as shadow IT is born. Apps need data, but very soon users are finding ways to not only use their personal devices, but also apps to access that corporate data. Finally, there's a natural shift as a younger generation, you know, a generation that has grown up in this always connected world, leveraging tools like Twitter and Facebook, and always been connected, whether it's by text or social media. Those new graduates, you know, are huge social collaborators and are bringing those connected collaboration skills to the workforce and expecting an infrastructure that will support them in how they work. So whatever the drivers, the shift has created, you know, definitely a tension between what users need and what IT is responsible for. And some additional information from our partner, Gartner, 60% of users think that IT is incapable of providing productivity capabilities, while Gartner also predicts by 2016, 20% of BYOD projects will fail because IT has imposed too tight a control on personal devices. So some major considerations for the discussion today, you know, so if you are a third-party SaaS or leverager, you know, that you're leveraging these tools already, like O365, Salesforce, Dropbox, Twitter, Facebook, Citrix, etc., this information should be a big benefit to you. If you're concerned about how you're managing your desktops, either within your domain or more importantly outside your domain, because you may have a lot of people that are not VPN connected. How do we manage those desktops? Are you looking to implement, or maybe you're in the process of considering implementing a BYOD strategy? And are you struggling with the amount of devices that you need to manage? So this is once again due to that device proliferation. You know, before it would have been typically just one device per person or per employee we had to worry about, but now it's upwards of 3 or 4 devices per employee. And we need to be concerned about data protection on those devices. What happens when those devices get lost? How do we manage those devices? How do we ensure, you know, that the right people at the right time in the right location are getting access to the data? And also, very importantly, you may be looking at two-factor authentication solutions. And I'm not talking about, you know, legacy like RSA, key fobs, or anything like that. I'm talking about, you know, leveraging your mobile devices, getting a phone call on your device to identify who you are, or a text message, or a secondary email, or something like that. You know, two-factor has come a long way from what it was 10 years ago, when it was indeed pretty cumbersome. So the discussion today, of course, is EMS, the Enterprise Mobility Suite, which encompasses single identity, often referred to as well as hybrid identity, MDM and MAM, mobile device management and mobile application management, which is Windows Intune is the solution we're going to be talking about today. And then, of course, rights management services. Or in the case today, we're going to be talking about Azure Rights Management Services, which is part of Microsoft's cloud offering as well. So we can leverage most of these solutions directly from the cloud without having to do a whole lot of infrastructure deployments on-prem. So to begin, we'll cover hybrid identity or single identity. So identity is definitely, you know, it's not a nice to have. It's at the core of an efficient workforce. To keep our employees as productive as possible, we need to provide them a single identity that works across cloud and on-premises assets. So with identity federation and single sign-on, users have one set of login credentials and passwords, and IT is able to more efficiently manage those user identities, or in this case, that single identity, in fact. And when users do forget passwords, they have the ability to reset their own passwords. So this is a big play as well today. You know, most IT organizations expend an inordinate amount of time resetting passwords for end users, and it's actually a big pull on budgets for a lot of our IT organizations. So if we have a good way to solve that, that's always a benefit. Security remains paramount, of course. You know, users have the ability to bring new devices into the enterprise, but IT can validate that the devices connecting to the network are owned and controlled by individuals with the appropriate credentials. And MFA, or multiple factor authentication, helps to provide an additional layer of protection. And finally, hybrid identity, you know, provides IT tools for monitoring suspicious activity as well on this identity layer, such as an employee may be accessing their expense account from San Francisco at 9 a.m. in the morning, and then somehow logging in to access the same information from Hong Kong, you know, 45 minutes later. So through reporting tools that are available to us, we can isolate that kind of activity as well. So some of the pain points when it comes to identity and some of the challenges. So from the user point of view, you know, users want to access their applications from any location and their data across those multiple devices that we talked about. They also want a single set of credentials, and they want that self-service capability. You know, there's nothing more frustrating, even though we love IT, than having to reach out to IT, you know, to get our password changed, whereas wouldn't it be wonderful if we could just do it through a portal? And then IT as well wants to make their world a bit better also. So they don't want to be managing the multiple identities of users. They want to reduce the cost of the help desk calls. But of course, they also want to make sure, you know, that they're compliant and that users are only connecting to information that they have permission to. And how EMS helps us with that through hybrid identity, of course, is with those self-service features, the single sign-on experience, and consistent identities. So identity as the control point. So the enterprise, is typically running, and most of us will be familiar with this, is running key applications, on premises, and we pretty much likely maintain a directory of on-premises identities that we manage internally. We use those directories to typically access those on-premises applications, so obviously this is fairly commonly going to be Windows Active Directory. But with the proliferation of cloud applications, SaaS applications, IaaS, PaaS, etc., we also run some additional key applications in the cloud, and users frequently access multiple public clouds, consumer applications, and in order to do that, they have to have a needed different set of credentials for each of these applications, so that is the big bane of all of our existence. So we have multiple usernames, passwords to maintain for both on-premises and in the cloud. So with Microsoft's Azure Active Directory, our hybrid identity, there's definitely a solution around this with identity at the core of that solution. So Azure AD integrates with the existing identities on-prem and in the cloud with one simple connection, that we can configure quite quickly for you. And now users can seamlessly connect with many cloud applications and resources using that single identity that Azure AD can authenticate to no matter where the users are located. And of course, more importantly, again, on multiple devices. So a single identity allows IT also to offer that self-service option that I was alluding to. And we'll look closer at the self-service option in a couple of slides. Continuing on hybrid identity, while individual tools to solve individual problems are, definitely effective, it may not always be the most efficient in either cost or our time. For example, having one tool to manage PCs and a different tool to manage mobile devices is inevitably going to lead to, duplication of certain tasks, and this may lead to, in my experience, an inconsistent experience for the end user across those different devices. So having one user identity for accessing on-prem applications and a different identity for cloud apps is definitely creating extra work for IT, but putting an extra burden on our users. So our user needs access to these apps, and in order to get their job done, they're typically very busy individuals, and they need access to a lot of different apps. So they want one username and one password for all the different apps. They certainly don't want IT to know that they're storing all these different username and passwords in a OneNote or in an Excel file, or even worse, on multiple Post-it notes or something on their desk. And it really makes no difference to the user if the app is on premise or in the cloud. They just want one single identity to access that information. So IT, of course, again, this solution does help IT as much as the end user. We're all very busy all the time. We don't want to be concentrating on managing the status quo. We want to be moving forward with more strategic initiatives. So anything we can do to save time is definitely a big help. So ideally, we don't want to be spinning up a separate identity layer for each new application that gets onboarded. We need a better way to get a handle on some of those third-party SaaS apps that we didn't even know about. So using Microsoft's hybrid ID to build, on the Windows Active Directory investments we've already made, we can synchronize our users' on-premises identity and password with Azure AD to create, as we talked about, a single user identity for them across the cloud on premises. And that's not only all, of course. If our user forgets her password, which they often do, based on all of our experience, she doesn't need to call the help desk. There's that self-service facility for her. And it's very quick for her to reset that password with a couple of minutes, through a phone call or text message to her mobile device. And hybrid identity isn't about just keeping that user happy either, although certainly, it does help make everyone's life easier. It also gives those IT folks some critical tools to make sure only the people who are supposed to be accessing the systems are doing so. So as we all experience, our users likely want to have the latest gadgets, as we've seen before. They want to access that corporate resources across all their devices. So IT can create an added layer of authentication to each new device, getting the system to send a request for authentication to one of her trusted devices, such as multi-factor authentication challenge, or being required to register a device, so before they can access the data. And our user, of course, a lot of our users travel all the time, and they're known to lose their devices quite frequently, which has happened to me a couple of times myself. And through that reporting tools and alerts that we talked about, we can identify, someone who's not meant to be leveraging a certain device, depending on their location or the activity that they're trying to process and what kind of systems they're trying to access. We can identify that this is a potential anomaly, and we can block out that user from accessing the system. So for example, if someone was trying to access at one moment from North America, New York, and then 10 minutes later they're trying to access from the Middle East or Asia or something like that, it's very easy to identify that. So we also need to empower users with self-service that I talked about as well a moment ago. So this might happen if our users could access all their apps from many devices and geographies with a single set of credentials and get self-service capabilities. So Azure AD is definitely focused on this key capability. When our IT administrators assign access to pre-integrated SaaS applications from the Azure portal, shortcuts for these apps, or tiles as they're referred to, are displayed for the end user. So each user has a single personalized web page that is hosted on Azure. And this page is what is referred to as the access panel. And if you see the URL here, myapps.microsoft.com, is where your users will go to get to this access panel. And based on entering their single identity, they then get that wonderful, user-friendly page that gives them access to all the different applications, whether it's on premises or in the cloud, that they're meant to have access to. That's also where we can manage the single sign-on experience. We can also manage the password reset as well, happens through that interface, very user-friendly, as I talked about, through a mobile device, a phone call, or a text message. And there's also the facility through this access panel for end users, depending on a hierarchy, to assign we as the administrators can create groups of people. So for example, we could give the HR manager the facility to add people in and out of their group for access to the cloud-based payroll system or something like that to get our pay stubs. So we can take that management away from IT and hand it to power users within the organization, and they can add and remove different groups of people from applications. And that once again just makes it easier for IT, and people can also request access to different applications as well. So we can provide a listing of different apps. So maybe, let's say I work in the sales team and I need an access to our CRM, I need access to some revenue information through a reporting tool or a BI tool or something like that, and I'm a new hire, I can just go in and access or request access, and the people that manage those groups who are outside of AD will have the facility to make those approvals themselves. So there's a nice little workflow engine that runs in the background also. So this is just a screenshot of a typical access panel, maybe for an end user within a typical enterprise organization. So you'll see there's a mixture of on-premises and SaaS or cloud-based applications. So very user-friendly, and you'll see the groups approvals and profile tabs as well. So that's where you would go in, request access to additional applications. Or if you were a power user, you would manage your approvals as they're coming into you. And your profile is where you would reset your password quite quickly. So to date, 6 months ago, there was only 1,000 applications that Microsoft was supporting, which was already quite a lot for pre-integrated cloud apps in the gallery that we can do single sign-on. But as of today, and this is probably out of date already, we're up to 2,000 pre-integrated apps. So, whether they're for your corporation or personal use, it's quite easy to roll out this integration through a nice configuration screen in your Azure Management Portal for this single identity. Okay, so it's 12:28, so moving on to mobile device management and mobile application management. So device management, has increasingly become about those new form factors I talked about. Most companies definitely have solid solutions for corporate owned PCs. But where the challenge, I believe, lies is mobile devices and non-domain joined PCs have brought great new challenges, and it's not all about bring your own device either. Increasingly, users have more say over the devices they use for work. Many organizations do have a BYOD policy, or indeed whether they have a policy or not, personally owned devices are definitely finding a way into the workplace, as we've all experienced. So the Microsoft solution, Intune, offers a way to manage those devices, and it definitely doesn't impede the end user's experience. Still lets them use the device they love and gives those users a degree of control over their own devices through what's referred to as the Windows Intune Company Portal. So users can, through this portal, can enroll their own devices and then access the apps targeted to them by IT based on, the groups they reside in and their identity. So once enrolled, we can enforce those policies and get a view of inventory or hardware and software across the enterprise, which is a big benefit. And if a device is lost or stolen, or someone leaves the company and simply wants to stop using their device for work, they can self-service selectively wipe their device of corporate information, or IT can remove it as well if required. And for personally owned devices, as I say, the end user can perform it, or IT can perform it. So this unified device management includes mobile device management of iOS and Android, as well as Windows Phone 8, of course, and Windows tablets. We're also able to manage PCs that are outside of our domain, so a lot of tools today that we'd be leveraging within the enterprise for device management would typically be for domain joined devices. So let's take a closer look. So what are the challenges? So once again, the user pain points. We want to be able to use the devices, our personal devices, to access information, but we also want a consistent experience. On the IT side, we need to be able to deploy and manage applications on those devices, whether they're owned by the company or not. We are definitely concerned about security and compliance, and we need an efficient way of locking or retiring those devices, or removing those devices if required, depending on where an employee is in our life cycle, or maybe if the device is stolen or something like that. So with Windows Intune mobile device management, we can manage all of this, giving access to the applications, the data, and the resources from pretty much any device from any location. So looking at Intune a bit closer again, it provides, mobility management, helps organizations definitely provide their employees with access to corporate applications, data, and resources from virtually anywhere on almost any device. On the MDM side, we can provide restricted access to Exchange email based on device enrollment. That we'll look at in more detail in a moment. We can deploy certificates, Wi-Fi connectivity, VPN connectivity, email profiles automatically once a device is enrolled for management by the end user. We can simplify the device enrollment in case of large-scale deployments of Outlook or Intune service accounts. And at the overarching level, we have that self-service company portal for users to enroll their own devices and manage their devices for themselves, and download and install corporate applications across all the different mobile platforms. On the mobile application management side, we can maximize mobile productivity with Intune managed Office mobile apps, while definitely still protecting corporate data by restricting, actions such as copying and pasting and saving as within your managed apps. And we can extend those same management capabilities to existing line of business apps using the Intune app wrapper, which I might talk about towards the end, which is even more important when it comes to managing Macs within our external domain as well. And on the PC side, we can, the Intune client provides a lightweight, agentless management from the cloud or via agent-based management tools for managing all of these PCs outside our domain. If you're already leveraging System Center for on-domain device management, it integrates seamlessly with Intune also, so you can actually manage all of that infrastructure through one single pane of glass through System Center. And it provides real-time protection, of course, against malware threats on the managed computers. We can collect information also about hardware configurations and software installed on managed computers, maybe for audit or just for inventory control. And we can deploy new software as well based on policies, depending on where the user is, what the role is within the organization, but we can set all those policies up as the administrator. So one of the big benefits of leveraging Intune and having a device enrolled within Intune is we can also leverage conditional access to resources within our organization. So if a device is not meeting our compliance or our policy rules, we can reject access to our corporate data depending on that. So a classic example will be a conditional access to something like email, whether it's Exchange on-prem or Exchange in Office 365. So in this scenario, the user has enrolled her device in the Intune service and is now trying to access her corporate email using Office 365. And what happens is, depending on the policy verification that takes place on the device, we can see that the device is not currently meeting our policies. And based on the user trying to access email, they'll get an automatic email back from the Intune service with instructions and actually a download on how to make their device meet the policies. And once they meet that policy and try and access email again with their username and password, we go through a second policy verification, and based on the correct verification, and that could be anything like, is the device encrypted, what kind of password is set, etc., is two-factor authentication rolled out, etc. And based on correct policy verification, now the user can access their data. So that helps us definitely make our information more secure within the organization. So we've already established, how our user, what their identity is, and that we're happy about their identity. And we also know that they want to access her apps, and that that the user uses multiple different devices. She's got a PC, she's got a couple of tablets, maybe an iPad and a Surface like I do. But she always wants to be using the latest devices. So we need an efficient way from the IT point of view to get to each of these devices and manage them and make sure that they're compliant. So we may already have System Center Configuration Manager deployed, as I mentioned earlier, to manage the PCs within our company, but now leveraging and layering on Windows Intune, we can manage all those different devices as well, and through the same single console. And with the Intune company portal, users who have enrolled their device in Intune or IT Pro, they can apply those policies and use the identity settings we already have in place to target apps to different users based on their identity and the device type they're using. So what that means, when our user gets a new device, they simply have to enroll it through the company portal, and our policies will be automatically applied to that device. And then our user can view all the apps that we make available to her and download them onto the device herself. And as I mentioned before, as I said, knowing that a lot of our users may lose their devices, you have that facility through the company portal, either self-service or through IT, to wipe that end user's device quite quickly also. So the final spoke in the wheel we're going to talk about today is rights management. So this kind of goes hand in hand as well with everything we've been talking about today. So we talked about identity management, we talked about mobile device management, but more importantly, what do we do now with data that actually lands on those devices, and how can we make that data more secure and ensure that it doesn't get into the wrong hands? So definitely, data is getting into the wrong hands all the time, and we witness that on a daily basis, and that can be definitely costly or embarrassing to our organizations. But even, less spectacular breaches can damage our business or lead to serious consequences, especially in industries, with stringent either internal or external compliance and regulations. So we need to keep our data as protected as possible, striking that balance, of course, between user productivity and data protection. So the Microsoft solution definitely helps companies address those challenges. So let's think about the ultimate goal here. We want users to work from anywhere on their devices with access to their corporate resources. And this can be achieved, of course, through native applications for that device platform, web-based applications, and through data sync. But we can enable users to register devices for single sign-on and access to that corporate data with Workplace Join. So this allows IT to be able to open access to applications and data that otherwise would not be available, in return for us in IT knowing a bit more about the device that our end user is using. So providing those users with access to those resources they need to get their job done means ensuring that those users can access corporate applications and data wherever they are on their devices. And to further protect that data, access can be conditional based, as we looked at a moment ago, based on the user's identity or the device that they are using. If it's not meeting our policies, we don't let them get at the data. And whether the user is inside the corporate network or connecting from an external location, we can also build in rules to manage that also. So depending on network connectivity, we can block content also. So in addition to the on-premises resources that need to be accessed, the user is likely to also want to access cloud-based applications and services. So to make this a seamless experience for our users, we typically provide them, with a common identity when accessing those cloud-based resources, which is the hybrid identity we looked at earlier. An example of this will be requiring the user to register the device that they are using. And once they register the device, it becomes known and trusted to us. With device level authentication and additional security can be provided by IT, creating business-driven access policies with multi-factor authentication based on the content being accessed. So what are the challenges around rights management? So we want our users to make them productive, to be access sensitive information securely, and also sometimes we want them to give the ability to work online and store that information locally on their devices. From the IT point of view, that can be the flip side of that, that a significant amount of data today does reside on individual users' devices. We need to be able to define a classification of data based on content and not just location, so depending on what kind of content it is, apply different rules. And IT, of course, must be able to meet the security and compliance standards that are forced upon us internally and externally across all these different devices, whether they're owned by our organization or not, and specifically those BYOD devices. So rights management, definitely provides all of those facilities. We can centralize the data and the classification and controlling access to the data center. So getting into a bit more detail on rights management. Okay, so sitting behind the apps that our users access, is of course regularly a bunch of sensitive corporate information. And it's typically IT's job to keep that information protected, at all times. That's one of our core functions within the organization. So managing who has access is definitely a great starting point. And features like selective wipe that we talked about earlier, that definitely helps. But letting IT wipe corporate data while leaving that personal data intact. But while our IT admin wants to make sure our user has everything they need to be productive while she's out of the office, we in IT have to ensure, of course, that information only resides where it's supposed to and is only accessed by those with the right authority to do so. So not so long ago, and we've probably all done this, our user would simply email themselves a copy of a sensitive document to our home PC, so she could continue, so they could continue to work over the weekend or take it with them on the road. And why we love their work ethic, that's typically, a high risk from a protection and regulatory and compliance point of view. So with the rights management services, we can now provide our user with a way to sync those documents which she's working on to a secure centralized location that she can access only with authorized devices. So where needed, our IT admin can restrict the ability, as we see here, to edit the documents, print the documents, or forward the documents depending on the device they're using to access the information. So if she's on her tablet, she may not have that facility, but when she's on her domain joined PC or within the office, depending on her location, we can give them that facility. So that was a high-level overview of Enterprise Mobility Suite. So I'm going to talk a bit more about some of the conclusions. So what we looked at first was hybrid identity, also referred to as Azure Active Directory Premium. And this slide deck will be available to everybody on the call as well today. So we'll be forwarding this out after the meeting. So don't worry if you don't grab all of these benefits. But absolutely self-service password reset is available. MFA for greater security. We have those over 2,000 apps, so I must update this slide, in fact, to say over 2,000 apps. We have the reporting ability, to see where different, or capture where different people are accessing their content from. And depending on different alerts we can build in, we can quickly get alerted to a security threat. And we have those synchronization capabilities between Active Directory on-prem and Azure AD in the cloud as well, which is a huge benefit. But the overarching benefit, of course, is that single sign-on, single identity. When it comes to MDM, we're able to manage all these BYOD devices across multiple different platforms. We can selectively wipe information. We can manage conditional access. That was that email example I gave, whereby we won't let people access our content. And email is just one example. It could be SharePoint, it could be OneDrive, it could be multiple different platforms that we're restricting our users from hitting. And based on their device and the policies that they've implemented on their device, we may or may not let them hit the content. And by default then, if we're capturing all this information, we can also do very detailed reporting on the different platforms, hardware and software that our users are leveraging, and build our IT model more in line with what our end users are leveraging for accessing data. And on the rights management server piece, it brings the ability to limit what we can do with individual documents and content no matter where it lives. So unless somebody can authenticate back to our rights management server, maybe we'll only let them read the content. We won't let them forward on the content, print it, save it as, do anything like that. So even if we lose a thumb drive with a document on it with RMS applied, whoever requires that content still can't do anything with that document unless they can come all the way back to our environment and authenticate back over the cloud to ensure that they are the right person accessing that data. So there's definitely a huge amount we can do with that on premises as well. Same thing, so we're not only talking about cloud-based solutions here, we're talking about on premises and cloud. And I think this is a very helpful slide when it comes to, a lot of people ask the questions, doesn't Office 365 do a lot of this already? So the short answer is yes. And Office 365 is a wonderful tool. But based on our experience, you'll see at the bottom here, I list out all the different facilities that are available across the different workloads, single identity, MDM, and information protection. And O365 does provide some ability, but we nearly always find that most of our customers, once they look deeply at their requirements, that they want to make that step up to the EMS suite. And this will be a great slide for you as well on takeaway. And all the time Microsoft is adding additional facilities to O365 in these areas. But like, let's say on the identity management, I think the big benefit here is the self-service group management and the right back to on-prem. So self-service password management is great if our identity is managed only in the cloud. But what if we have Active Directory on-prem, which most of us do, which is typically our single version of the truth when it comes to identity management? So we would need the EMS suite or AD Premium to do that. When it comes to MDM, and there's a lot more policies and conditional access that I demoed as well as part of MDM, which is not available within just Office 365. And then on the rights management services, absolutely you can do a lot out of the box with Office 365. But once you go beyond just Office 365 data, maybe you want to protect data on premises, file shares, SharePoint. If you want to integrate with Outlook and the Office Fact Client, you definitely need to leverage Azure Rights Management Services, which is part of the EMS suite also. So this is a great takeaway slide, definitely. So as far as pricing, so this is definitely a subscription-based model, and Microsoft, is on its second or third iteration of these offerings. So I typically don't get heavily involved until the second iteration, and we're now on the third. And Microsoft, you can buy each of these offerings individually, which is quite typically. But as goes with Office 365, if you buy more than one offering and maybe buy two, more often than not, you're nearly always better off just buying the suite. So this is referred to as the Enterprise Mobility Suite at the bottom. So you'll see here the standalone total, if you bought all of these products individually, will be $15.75. But if you go for the suite, the price is cut in half, and this is retail pricing as well. So if you're a Microsoft Enterprise Agreement customer, you could be looking at significant discounts beyond this as well. And the big benefit is that everything we looked at today are cloud-based, pretty much SaaS offerings, that you can deploy quickly, get up and running within a few hours, and you don't have to be worried about multiple data centers for managing this infrastructure. Which is becoming quite the norm today. So what are the next steps? So today, was definitely an overview. So I will be doing 3 additional webinars throughout the spring, going deep dive and deep demos on each of the different areas we talked about today. So there are the 3 bottom webinars you see here. I'll be doing Intune, the single identity deep dive, and the rights management services deep dive. It is now March, and our next webinar as well will be a Power BI webinar that we're executing in April. So we'll be pushing that out through our regular channels as well to our customers. And if any of our customers are interested in the Microsoft Experience Center that we run every 2 months at the Microsoft Cambridge facility, this is a great experience for our end users within our customer organizations. You know, not typically IT, where we bring in 10 of your users. They can be just regular end users or power users, and we let them experience, you know, the latest and greatest technologies that Microsoft has to offer from the end user point of view. So we typically find, from an IT point of view, if you're looking to get buy-in on these latest technologies, that can be a great session. So it's typically half a day in duration, but it definitely can help you drive new technologies within your organization. And of course, you know, we are a consulting organization, and as I said, we're doing these deployments all the time. So we have a specific EMS offering as well, where if you want to go individually on a deep dive on these technologies, I and one of our senior architects, Senthil, who specializes in the EMS suite, would come on site. We would spend additional time at your location educating you about EMS and helping you understand what the offering is, and of course looking at your specific requirements. And we would then deliver you a roadmap for deploying one or more of the workloads within the suite. And we have a lot more offerings as well that are readily available on our website, specifically, you know, around Azure. I do a lot of these workshops, quick starts, where we'll actually come in, you know, for X amount of days and actually get you up and running on Azure, depending on what you're trying to achieve. Maybe it's IaaS, like running VMs. Maybe you need help around extending your storage into the cloud. And we're doing a lot of work around big data and Hadoop right now. Maybe you want to move your website to Azure, which is quite common as well today, you know, because of the scalability that's available in Azure, depending on the cycle of your website and how it runs throughout the year. You know, sometimes the year you may need to ramp up depending on a certain season or something like that. So Azure is a great platform there. We can come in and extend your domain and your network to Azure as well. We have specific offerings around that to make Azure be effectively an extension of your data center. SharePoint Online, of course, is one of our core competencies. We're constantly rolling out intranets and extranets for different organizations and public internet sites. And we also do have hands-on Azure workshops as well. This would be typically more for developers who want to get familiar with what they can do with Azure. So one of our senior development architects would come to your location, set up an Azure environment for you, which is in reality setting it up in the Azure cloud, and let your user get familiar with how easy it is to start building applications to run in PaaS on Azure. So it's 12:55. So I'm just going to hand it over briefly to my colleague Vinny Alwani, who heads up our delivery practice within Lighthouse, and see if there were many questions, Vinny, that came up throughout that session.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, we've got a few. I'm going to start off with the first one here. It looks like it says, are Macs supported for Intune?
Okay, so that's a good question. So the short answer is no, not right now, okay? So when it comes to PC management, and to be definitive here, we're talking about managing devices that are not on our domain. So if we're talking about devices on our domain, like a Mac, I should say in this case, that is handled through System Center if it's on domain. But if it is not on domain and we have a PC, or Windows PC, Windows Intune has a client agent that will deploy to manage that device. But Macs are not currently supported. There is a Mac Intune wrapper that is available. I haven't done a whole lot of work with it, but that does give us the facility to put a wrapper around Mac OS applications and try and control them in that fashion, and then try and apply our policies with those wrappers. So It is coming. Microsoft understands that they need to support the Mac environment, and most of our customers in the New England region have definitely one or more Macs, that's for sure, if not all the way up to 50% Mac. So something that is definitely coming.
Okay, good. Next one is, looks like we have a requirement to share documents externally on a frequent basis in financial services. Is Azure RMS a good solution?
Okay, yeah, great question. So definitely, Vinny and I would spend a lot of time in front of customers with our architects talking about different solutions in healthcare and financial services and sharing information securely. And there are multiple different options. So RMS will definitely allow you to share securely. So meaning, unless you give the person who is trying to open the document specific permission to open that document, they will not be able to. Or you could give them some permission, like meaning that they can open it, but they can't forward it or save it as or print it or something like that. So it is one of many solutions that Microsoft provides. So it really depends on the specific scenario. So other facilities I think that are good for that are like Exchange Online encryption, which is part of Office 365. Some customers like that, some don't, based on our experience. Maybe setting up an extranet on SharePoint, a secure extranet, we find is often a good solution there as well. So just giving each of our customers or our partners, one secure site collection within our environment to handle that. So definitely lots of options, and RMS is definitely an option.
Okay. Next one that I'm seeing here is 80 Premium versus new version of Office 365 password reset.
Okay, so that must mean, oh yeah, so that was, what are the differences, I suppose the customer means there. Yeah, what are the differences between Office 365 password reset and AD Premium password reset? So yes, so you can now, this is a new offering with Office 365, you can do the self-service password reset, but the big differentiator is that there is no write back to your Active Directory on-prem unless you have AD Premium. So unless you're a very small organization that is only leveraging cloud identity, so you don't have AD on-prem, I think that's the big differentiator. So some customers it will work for, and some it won't, depending on how you have implemented your infrastructure. But that's the big difference.
Okay, Colin, I think we're at 1 o'clock, so I got time for one last one here. What infrastructure do I need on premises for these technologies?
Okay, so I suppose hopefully I was clear on that, but definitely to reiterate. So the big benefit of everything I talked about today is that this is all cloud-based technology. So meaning the single identity is managed in Azure Active Directory, which is a cloud-based offering. Windows Intune is all cloud-based. And then Azure Rights Management Services as well is all cloud-based. So where it comes to on-premises infrastructure would really be just for, let's say we want to synchronize our AD to the Azure Active Directory, we would need to do some work there. If we were managing single sign-on through Federation Services, which is referred to as Active Directory Federation Services, we may need to do some work there as well. But it's really dependent on each individual customer and their specific requirements. So sometimes for larger organizations, which is a bit ironic, we may need to do a bit of work on prem because you're still going to have your Active Directory, your core identity management solution still on prem. Okay, thank you, Vinny. All right, so thanks so much, everybody, for joining. The slide deck will be available. We'll be sending that out after the session today. And we hope to see you at one of our in-person events soon, or of course we do these webinars at least once a month, or if not twice a month, depending on our activity within the organization. So have a wonderful day and hope to see you all soon.